Hello and welcome to our London History Podcast, where we share our love of London, its people and places, and history in 20-minute espresso shots served with a dash of personality. I am your host, Hazel Baker, London tour guide and CEO of London Guided Walks, providing private tours, treasure hunts, guided walks, and live London quizzes to Londoners and visitors alike. Don't forget, we also transcribe all of our episodes, so if you want to read what we are also saying, then please visit londonguidedwalks.co.uk/podcast, click on the episode that you want, and you'll be able to have the transcript and any images or anything else that we will have to share. We put it there. Reviews for our podcast are greatly appreciated. They help us build awareness for the show, which in turn allows us to ensure we bring best value to our lovely listeners like you. Not only that, but they help us better understand what matters to you most, and we can make improvements in turn which benefit everyone. You can easily leave a review by clicking on the 5 stars, or you can write a little bit about what you enjoy most about our podcasts. That's enough of that. Let's get on with the show. Joining me in the studio today is City of London tour guide Ian McDiarmid.
Hello.
So Ian, today we're going to be focusing on guilds in the City of London, but mainly through medieval times.
Yes, we are.
So, first question, what is a guild?
Well, it's simply an association of people, we're talking men by and large, who come together either for purposes of promoting their interests in their trade or come together for religious purposes.
So why the word guild? Why not association or group?
It's just medieval English. It probably comes from the same root as the German Geld money, and it's to do with paying dues into the club, if you like.
So it's basically a membership club?
Yes.
And how did they start?
Well, they go right back. So there's references to them in Anglo-Saxon times. But what's interesting is that they become formalised really in the 14th and 15th centuries. So we've got substantial records from the 14th and 15th centuries onwards. And as normal, whenever we're talking about things historical, it's dangerous to argue from an absence of evidence. But the fact that we don't have formal records before the 14th century, it's probably reasonable to conclude that they existed, but they were informal associations of people before that time. Mm. And what's interesting in the 14th and 15th centuries is you begin to get two kinds of records. You could begin to get the internal administrative records of them as an organisation, i.e. they're employing somebody to sort of record their minutes and what they've been up to. And before 1400, we've only got these for about 3 guilds, and then they sort of mushroom after that. And then the other kind of evidence is them trying to get some official form of recognition. And you could get this from 3 sources. You could get it from the church, you could get it from the Lord Mayor and the aldermen in the City of London, and you could get it from the Crown. And from the church, what would happen would be a religious guild, i.e. one that's men coming together for ceremonial purposes to say prayers for the dead, basically gets taken over by a commercial guild. And this is what happened with the Salters. They take over a guild in Bread Street, Guild of Corpus Christi, All Hallows in Bread Street. And this may sound a little bit strange, but in the early part of the Middle Ages, the trades tended to live together, and I'm sure there's some kind of economic term for this, but it makes sense. If you want to go and buy salt, for example, or you want to buy a bit of ironwork, it makes sense for all the people selling that to congregate together so that somebody who wants to buy it can just walk from one stall to another.
Well, you see this even in modern day. If you want to buy a mobile phone, you'll notice that, it was Coffee Warehouse and Orange and Three. They would all have their shops right next to each other. Yeah,
good. So it's a phenomenon that you and I know about, and there's probably some short-term economic phrase to cover it. It's just we don't know what it is. Yeah, so they all come. So the Salters and everybody else would be living together originally, and so it would make sense for them to, if they were forming to dominate these religious guilds as well, and then the religious guild could quite naturally just be taken over to act as a trade guild. More common ways for them to come in together, though, were to seek recognition from the Lord Mayor and Aldermen. And this is where you get a series of ordinances saying this is how we're going to run our guild. And then the Corporation of London, as manifested by the Mayor and the Aldermen, would recognise that. And that would give you some kind of official power to impose your regulations and, above all, to be able to impose your monopoly. And the third sort of recognition, which became increasingly important in the 14th century, was the crown. And what guilds do, so for example, the Skinners do this in 1327, the same year as the merchant tailors. They get a charter from the crown recognising them, and they have to pay the crown money for this, very convenient for the kings of England, who are frequently impecunious. But it gives the guilds great advantages. Once you've got a charter, you are technically incorporated, which means that you can act as a corporate body, very useful if you want to undertake law cases. And crucially, it means that you can be left endowments in perpetuity.
Oh.
So people can give you a grant of land or something, and because you've got this recognition through the charter, that land given to you as a guild will stay with you forever. But it's significant that we have guilds surviving today, and they survive for this reason.
And so in medieval London, they're at their peak. How many were there?
About 50, and we need to divide them between the big prosperous guilds, those for merchants. So we're talking about the elite of the London community here. People like the mercers. Mercers deal in high-end textiles like silk. The drapers, who are also dealing in textiles, but they're mainly interested with the export of woolen cloth. The grocers, who are basically importing spices, and spices are incredibly expensive. The fishmongers are there quite a lot of the time, and also the goldsmiths. And we've got an ordinance from the early 16th century which gives the order of precedence of the guilds, and this probably reflects roughly the order of precedence that they always had, though they would be changing position every now and then. They were very interested in their position on this. And the top 12 are, they're known as the Great 12, and they are the ones at the top, the ones I've just mentioned. So the first guild, the one that heads the list, is the mercers. And then beneath them you've got the more ordinary workaday guilds, people like the weavers. And one good distinction between these would be between the Skinners, who are amongst the big. They rank 6th or 7th in the list that has come down to us, and the Toyers, that's Tawyyer, and the Toyers were people who made white leather.
So these secret societies, what did they do?
Well, they had three main functions: economic, religious, and social. So the economic one is the most important one, and the most important aspect of this is imposing a monopoly. If you wanted to sell anything within the City of London, you had to be a member of the guild, and if you weren't, if you were selling stuff illegally, they would take action against you. And imposing a monopoly is obviously in their interests because it enables them to keep prices artificially high. They also restrict the supply of labour coming into their trades, and they do this through the apprenticeship scheme. If you want to become a member of the guild, you can do it by paying, you can do it by if your father is a member of the guild, but the main way, increasingly so in the Middle Ages, is to serve an apprenticeship. And the apprenticeships vary in terms of years, but they were typically between 5 and 7. So you have to have done this to be able to practice a trade. And again, this restricts the supply of people who are able to indulge in the trade and therefore keep prices high.
It also means that the quality, the standard of work, surely is standardised and it's kept high as well.
Yes, and this is the other aspect that's very important. You can imagine that in medieval London, you've got no standardisation of goods, you've got no trademarks, and if you're a consumer, it's vitally important for everyone concerned that you have faith in what you're buying. Important for the consumer, so that they know what they're getting, but also important for the people selling them, because you want to encourage people to come back and buy again. And the idea is that if you buy something from a guild, you are assured of the quality. And so you mentioned the apprenticeship schemes, which imply that the people are fully trained. But also, they are very hot on quality assurance. They regulate this very, very strictly, and they're very, very tough on people who try to sell substandard goods. And there are all kinds of ritual punishments that we know about. So, for example, if you were a butcher and you sold rotten meat, there's an example of somebody having the offal, the offender being placed in the stocks and having the offended offal being burnt in front of their nose. If you were a baker, we get the phrase baker's dozen, meaning 13, because a baker's batch of loaves would be 12, but you make a 13th so it can be inspected. And again, if the loaf was of substandard, you might find yourself put on a trestle and dragged around the city with the offending loaf tied round your neck. And
naughty.
Naughty. And the essential point about these punishments, obviously, is humiliation. And it's in a face-to-face society in which prestige, respectability is of crucial importance.
That's right. And it also shows that justice has been done as well.
Yes, and it's showing that the guilds are caring.
And what's the worst thing that could happen if you were found to be below par?
And ultimately, they can expel you, and that means you can't make a living. They were, in addition, responsible for the actual price fixing of a lot of goods. There were lots of goods that were deemed to be essential to everyday life, things like bread, salt, wine, and the prices were fixed by the government, but basically in the process of negotiation with the guilds. And this meant that they could sell stuff at a good price much of the time, but it also meant that in times of scarcity, they couldn't price gouge. So if there was a bad harvest, the bakers could not just put up the prices to what the market would bear. And this is informed by two things. One is the concern for social order, but it's also this concept that they have then of the just price, that they don't like speculators and they don't like price gougers, as we would call them now. So they fulfill these very important economic functions, and they absolutely dominate the economic life of London in the Middle Ages. And then beyond that, they're also religious associations. So we've mentioned already that some of the trades actually grow out of what are purely religious associations, sometimes called confraternities. But the guilds always had important religious functions. So they would the most important perhaps is ensuring that you get a decent burial. So funerals cost a lot of money. Again, it's to do with prestige. If you're a member of the guild will give you a good send-off. And some of the guilds have got their funeral pools surviving. And a few years ago, there was an exhibition of medieval embroidery at the Victoria and Albert.
I remember that one.
And the highlight, well, in my opinion,
behind the glass, I remember this.
At the end was the pall belonging to the fishmonger.
Yeah, sorry if we're getting overexcited about this. Yeah, this was an exhibition back in 2017, wasn't it? It was about masterpieces of English medieval embroidery, and it had some of the most outstanding examples of English medieval embroidery that I have ever seen. And yeah, you're absolutely right. The fishmonger's pall, which is about early 1500s. This was like the pièce de résistance at the end of the exhibition, and it was simply beautiful.
And perhaps I should just explain what a pall, P-A-L-L, is. It's a cloth that goes over your bier or your coffin.
And it looks fabulous, doesn't it? You know, it can be really, really quite bling. And it's not for one use. They'll use it for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, the pall in the V&A was absolutely superb, wasn't it? I mean,
exquisite.
Yeah, I'm not sure how often they have it on display, the fishmongers, that is. Probably not that often.
No, at the apothecaries, they have their pall on display.
Do they?
Yeah, they do.
Oh, okay.
But it's interesting because you're saying all these guilds with men meeting. I don't think any of them embroidered a pall.
No. We could go on to women and guilds. There were only a couple of women in them. Sometimes women would inherit their fathers, would inherit a place in the guild if there were no sons. So there were a couple of women. They weren't completely excluded, but largely excluded. So, yeah, we talked about them getting a good send-off. The other important thing is purgatory. So the Catholic Church introduces purgatory, I think, about the 12th century. I think about then. But anyway, it's certainly up and going as an idea by the 14th and 15th centuries.
And this is like Dante's Inferno. You're not in heaven yet. You've got to work your way through, haven't you?
Yeah, and the way they describe purgatory is that it sounds a lot more like hell than it does, anyway, than heaven say.
Yeah.
But the crucial thing with purgatory is you can get out of it, and your way out of it can be speeded up by people on the outside, that is the quick, the people who are alive, saying prayers for you. And these prayers are known as obits, and you can leave money to have obits said for you, but also the guild will have prayers said for their erstwhile members. So this is one of the important benefits of being a member of a guild. And also, we shouldn't forget that they are just places of conviviality. So it's about men getting together and having a good time. So all of the guilds would have a feast day of their foundation, and which would be dedicated to their patron saint. And a lot of it is about men dressing up in their livery, and another word for guilds is livery companies, their guild uniform, as it were, and getting pissed, essentially. Can I say pissed, Hazel?
We've said it twice. So you mentioned before that they have an order of precedence, and surely that's got to have been contentious. I mean, who says that you're number 3 or number 4?
Well, indeed, and they're saying that the mercers were number 1, but there's some indication that before then the grocers had vied with them for this top spot, and they were very, very sensitive on the point of precedence. And I think I mentioned very briefly that the Skinners are either 6th or 7th, and they have this ritual whereby they change places each year with the merchant tailors. And this goes back to one of the Lord Mayor's shows, processions, in the 15th century. So in the 15th century, well, indeed in the Middle Ages, the Lord Mayor's procession took place on the river. And one year the merchant tailors and the Skinners, who were always vying with each other for precedence, turned this into their own private boat race. And it got violent, and some people lost their lives. And as a result of that, the Lord Mayor came in with this ruling that they should alternate between one should be 6th one year and the other one should be 6th the following year. So it's very curious. So the order of precedence was always a source of potential conflict. And
Well, is this something that you hear, don't you? Say, I'm all at 6s and 7s.
Yes, a lot of people think that this comes from this thing about the Skinners and the merchant tailors alternating. Unfortunately, I think that the phrase to be at 6s and 7s predates this. I think it may get a mention in Chaucer, but it's rather a nice story, isn't it?
It's a nice story.
It's probably a kind of 15th century humour of the Lord Mayor being very witty by saying this thing about 6s and 7s because it perhaps fitted in with an existing phrase. So probably not, unfortunately. The other big source of potential problem with them was their monopolies. So I've already mentioned the Toyers and the Skinners, but there are all kinds of ways the trades overlapped. I remember when I first started doing guiding on guilds, I had to check on the difference between a cordwainer and a cobbler because I didn't know. And
what is the difference?
Well, a cordwainer makes shoes and a cobbler repairs them.
Oh.
Yes, but they were getting into conflict, and you can just sort of see. Also, another one. I don't think they did conflict, but you can imagine the tallow chandlers and the wax chandlers having, and so it goes on. There are all these overlapping.
The apothecaries. So they were part of the greengrocers,
or
the Grocers Guild.
Right.
But of course, that was more trading the food items. And the apothecaries wanted to be more on the sort of the healing, magical side. And so they broke away and created their own guild.
All right, okay.
Last question for you. Why did the medieval guilds decline?
Yeah, they declined for numerous reasons. One very obvious explanation is that London expands. So London expands beyond the city's jurisdiction, which went to the walls and just a bit beyond, to the city bounds. And London grows beyond that, and it becomes increasingly difficult for the guilds to regulate trades. Also, in general, the economy is becoming more complicated. It doesn't really make much sense to keep trades within the City of London when things like nails, for example, can be manufactured so much more cheaply elsewhere, and the guilds begin to lose their relevance. And as part of this, running alongside it, is the fact that London's economy changes, that London becomes increasingly dominated by the activities of the port and increasingly by finance, and the guilds are just irrelevant to this.
Yeah, and if you think about the developing areas outside the City of London, you've got Clerkenwell, known for its jewellery manufacturing and its clockmakers. You've got Spitalfields with the Huguenots. I mean, it wasn't all happening in the city anymore.
Or you think about the big brewers like Truman's.
You need space,
So they become increasingly irrelevant, but they're still going strong. I mean, people are still members of the guilds, in the 16th and 17th centuries, and indeed right up to the modern day. But increasingly in the 16th century, the fact you were a member of a guild didn't really indicate what line of work you were in or where your money came from. And they become increasingly sort of just places for networking, for socialising, and indeed for carrying on their charitable work.
If you want to know a bit more about guilds, then come on our medieval walk or our Best of Blackfriars, available as a public walk but also as a private tour. And we'll revisit the subject of guilds, but this time in a more modern context. That's all for now. I'll catch you next week.